Hi, and welcome back to Tea and Takeaways, a therapist's point of view. If we haven't met yet, I'm Vanessa, licensed therapist, mom coach, retired educator, and host of the Free to Be Mindful podcast. So, Netflix just dropped a three-part documentary called Fit for TV: The Reality of the Biggest Loser. So, of course, we'll need to unpack it. But before we dive in, I want to give a gentle disclaimer. We'll be talking about things like weight, body image, and eating behaviors. And if that feels sensitive or activating for you, please listen with care. And remember that if you need support, therapy is always an option. I'll also be giving you some resources towards the end, so make sure to tune into that or take a look at the show notes. And of course, as with every video, while I am a licensed therapist, I am not your therapist nor a specialist in this topic area. This video should be used as edutainment purposes only, and if you need professional help, please make sure you seek it. All right, let's dive in. Isn't it interesting how our brains can be so out of sight, out of mind? I can't even tell you when the last time before this was that I heard the phrase "the biggest loser." But watching this series instantly brought back so many memories. The dramatic beeping when the contestants step onto the scale, the cliffhangers before the commercials, the huge weight ins and huge weight losses. The Biggest Loser aired on October 19th, 2004, which was actually during my very first year teaching. I remember it so clearly because even in my school for a few years, we created our own competitions after the holidays. We'd weigh in before the school day started, track workouts and rack up points. And one year, I even won first place, losing about 20 to 24 pounds throughout the course of the competition. Of course, though, I was like 21 years old, living by myself, and had the time to take 2 to 3 workout classes at the gym back to back. Fast forward to my 40s, after having a baby last year, it's a win if I can even carve out 20 minutes to get onto the Peloton in my own house. But at the time, I didn't have to think twice about it, and it was completely normalized. Looking back at it now, though, it really shows how deeply these messages about weight were baked into our culture. And still are, and we'll get into that too. And that's the thing about watching this docuseries. It reminded me about how much of this show was rooted in spectacle and how far removed it was from real life. So episode 1 of the docuseries really sets the stage for what The Biggest Loser was all about. And the premise was simple. The person or the team who lost the most weight walked away with $250,000. And for contestants, it seemed like the chance of a lifetime because not only were they going to drop a lot of weight, they would also win a ton of money while doing it. And the hype was real. The scale became this giant dramatic character on stage. The beeping, the flashing numbers, the executive producer admitted that the scale was their main character. Now think about that. Not the people, not the health status, but the scale was the main character. And when they first opened the show, applications for season 1 were about 500 or so. And after that, thousands upon thousands lined up to be on the show. It went on to be a phenomenon that ran almost 17 years and in different countries. But of course, the producers openly admitted that they weren't looking for people who were overweight and happy. No, they wanted people who were overweight and unhappy because it made for a better story. And that was what the producers were actually after. So now for contestants, this was marketed as a chance to change their lives, to finally lose the weight, to be the person that they always wanted to be. Every week, contestants would lose about 12, 18, 24 pounds, my friends, in 7 days. And when they lost less than 10 pounds, it wasn't even considered to be a big deal. But let's be clear. That kind of rapid weight loss is not medically realistic or safe. And yet on the show, it became the standard, not only for the show, but for the viewers at home too. So you can imagine, contestants pushed themselves so far that they described the high of losing weight as the same feeling as shooting up heroin or smoking crack, because that's how addictive and all-consuming it became. And speaking of consuming, to lose weight that rapidly, it's all you were focused on. On The Biggest Loser, they would work out 6 to 7 hours a day. That's a work day. And it's only realistic if you're being paid like a professional athlete was paid to work out. An author who was on the documentary said that underlying it all was a belief that nothing you do in your entire life will be celebrated as much as getting thin. And this message didn't just come from the show. It just echoed the messages that so many of us get from family, from culture, from society at large. And whether we like to admit it or not, we're all guilty of this to a certain degree. So it's no wonder that people really wanted to be on the show to experience this life-altering transformation. On the other hand, though, behind the curtain, the producers weren't thinking about long-term weight loss or health. They just wanted to get on primetime television and make good TV. The more spectacle, the more dramatic, the better. They had these dramatic weigh-ins, the contestants collapsing, the trainers screaming insults masked as motivation. And to what degree was this seen? Well, the season 1 winner, Ryan, stated that when he won, he was told, of course, that he would get the $250,000. And then one of the trainers, Jillian Michaels, turned to him and said, "You just made me a millionaire." That one line says it all. The true winners of the show weren't the contestants. It was actually the people cashing out on their pain. And when you look at the reality, contestants working out 6 to 8 hours a day, eating less and less, sometimes not eating at all before a weigh-in, the focus again was never on building sustainable habits. It was all about shrinking bodies fast, no matter the cost. And for many, it came at a huge cost. We saw Danny Cahill on the documentary, and he was a season 8 winner, and he lost 239 pounds in almost 7 months. You got that? He didn't weigh 239 pounds. He lost that weight and was awarded in December 2009. And are you ready for this? After 9 years, he had gained it all back and was at the same weight when he began the competition. And he wasn't alone. Many of the contestants gained the weight right back, not because they were lazy and not because they couldn't continue it, but because when you don't have the psychological and emotional support in place, change just isn't sustainable. Episode 1 on this reminded me of just how deep our obsession is as a society with our weight, with our looks, and this cultural idea of thinness. We cheered for the contestants. We tuned in every week and we called it inspirational. But if we're being honest, what we really were celebrating wasn't health or healing, it was just the shrinking. Because the show sold us on the idea that the smaller you became, the more worthy you were of applause. And it reinforced the message that success equals thinness, and thinness equals happiness. And that message just wasn't aimed at the contestants. It was also aimed at us watching at home. And this obsession isn't new. It's in the magazines we grew up with, the family comments at gatherings, the compliments we give and get that almost always focus on appearance. You look so good. Did you lose weight? I mean, it's baked into our culture for decades. And The Biggest Loser just amplified it all on primetime TV. So we must remember that thinness doesn't equal worth and weight loss doesn't guarantee happiness. But yet as a society, we buy into that storyline because it feels familiar. That's what we know. And because so many of us are already carrying these beliefs inside our own lives. The other big takeaway from episode 1 is that you can't do this without professional mental and emotional support. The show pushed contestants to extreme diets and grueling workouts, but there was no real space for processing the shame, the trauma, or the relationship with food and the relationship with themselves that they've built over the years. And obviously, it takes many, many years to become an adult with this issue. So imagine the time that it takes to reverse it all. And for some, being yelled at and berated was actually the trauma that led them to overeat in the first place. So rather than healing, the show was actually reinforcing the very cycles people were so desperate to escape from. And this was why so many contestants ended up gaining the weight back. Not because they lacked willpower, but because willpower alone just isn't enough. Change that sticks comes from healing the inside first. It comes from addressing self-worth, identity, cultural expectations, and the emotional baggage that we all carry. And that's the piece that's so often missing in weight loss culture at large and in all of these different programs that still exist today. You can't just shrink a body and expect the heart and the mind and the spirit to automatically fall into place. Without professional support like therapy, coaching, emotional tools, the cycle just continues to repeat itself. And then we moved on to episode 2, which really hit home on how much weight, literally and figuratively, contestants put on losing pounds. For them, the number on the scale wasn't about health. It was tied to, again, their worth, their relationships, and even their future on a whole lot of levels. We heard one contestant say that she believed her marriage struggles were because of her weight. She thought losing weight would make her a better mom and that it would actually save her marriage. And others thought that being thinner would automatically make them a better parent, a better partner, a better version of themselves. And that's such a heavy burden to place on a number on scale. And all while contestants were exercising 6 to 8 hours a day, they were also popping stackers and overdoing it on caffeine. They would eat about 800 calories a day, but burn about 6,000 to 8,000 calories a day, which just isn't healthy. And while the trainers were framed as motivators, what we really saw were just coaches yelling deeply personal insults into people's faces. And here's what really stood out to me. For many contestants, the show became less about who they were and more about what they weighed. As Aubrey, an author, put it, you're either totally invisible and look through at someone who's obese or hyper visible and stared at. You're not seen as a person, you're seen as just a body. So imagine living like that, believing that you don't even deserve the space that you take up. This is where the show failed contestants the most. Because sure, trainers can be motivational and yes, coaches can push you, but when people are tying their entire identity and worth to the number on the scale, what they need is therapy. Because the truth is that, yeah, you can lose the weight, sure. You can go through any program and lose weight, but you can still carry, as I call it, a fat girl mindset. And I know from firsthand experience, I've been up and down my entire life, most recently dropping 60 pounds during COVID, then gaining it all back this past year because of pregnancy, and now working on losing it yet again. And maybe you can relate because so many of us have lived through this cycle of gain and loss through different parts of our lives, and we all have emotions that tie with it. And I'll share with you that even when the body changes, again, the mind just doesn't flip a switch. Without the deep emotional work, without unpacking the trauma, the shame, it's almost impossible to embrace change in a healthy way. So it's just plain reckless to put coaches in positions of doing the psychological work that they're not trained for. They need people to help them understand not just what's happening in the moment, how to carry that transformation into the rest of their lives. And this is where I think about perspective, because we all see life through our own lens, right? Through our own blinders. And some of us have built up this resilience through hardship and different experiences, while others are still healing from trauma that makes even the smallest step feel impossible. So to expect everyone to persevere in the same way, to push harder while getting yelled at, think military or maybe Greek lifestyle, without recognizing their own individual circumstances, it's truly unfair to be judged on that. And unhealthy when so much is packed on. The takeaway for episode 2 for me was all about worth. Contestants tied their value to their weight, and the show reinforced it at every turn. But your worth is not your size, and it's not the number on the scale either, or the tag on your clothes, or the calories you burn. True transformation has to go deeper. It means finding your worth in something outside of what you look like, outside of your talent, your creativity, your relationships, your character. And I'll be honest, this is hard and it's tricky. We see it a lot in people who have had to retire, let's say, from their jobs due to an illness or because of age. And we also see it in athletes from high school level to professional level. All their lives are known for this one thing, right? This talent. And then when they can't perform anymore, it really blows your mind, because when your identity is tied to one part of you, whether it's your body, your job, your sport, whatever it is, losing it then can feel like losing yourself. And this means having the right mental and emotional support to not just lose the weight, but to embrace the change and build a healthier relationship with yourself in the process. Because at the end of the day, weight can change, but your value as a person, that's constant. In episode 3, what really stood out to me was how much this show reflected and reinforced our culture's values. And when I did my And Just Like That series, I talked about how little girls were bred to want that happily ever after idea that we usually get from Disney movies. But through doing this, it's clear that we've also been bred to look poorly upon people in bigger bodies. And The Biggest Loser just amplified that belief for over a decade. By 2016, the pressure was too much and the show finally ended, and the culture had also shifted. We had entered an era of body positivity. But just as quickly as that grew, the pendulum swung again, and now in 2025, we're in an era where it seems that everything we're talking about has to do with semaglutide. It was interesting to see one of the women who was voted off the show early on. She looked incredibly thin in current day, and she did attribute it to these semaglutides. She called it the most effective intervention that she's ever experienced. But yet, on the other side of the token, we saw Danny, the season 8 winner, who famously lost those 239 pounds in less than 7 months. And by the time of the documentary, he had gained it all back. And he admitted that he hadn't gone on the medications, but he was indeed thinking about it. And the contrast was striking. One person leaning into new pharmaceutical options, and then the other showing just how unsustainable extreme weight loss can be without deeper support. And what struck me in this episode also was the range of contestant experiences, because some had awful things to say about the show and about the trainers, while others named their kids after one of the trainers. One person admitted that if she hadn't been on the show, she wouldn't have had the strength to make some serious changes in her life, so that the show didn't change her life, she changed her life. It reminded me that no experience is truly a one-size-fits-all. The same environment can feel empowering to one person and then deeply traumatic to another, especially when it comes to things like weight identity and self-worth. And then there was Bob Harper, who sadly and yet ironically experienced a big heart attack in 2017. He compared himself to the contestants because he said he had to change how he lived his entire life, even though he led a healthy lifestyle. And of course, there's so many factors that can attribute to that, but it was just ironic how that took place. And a very eye-opening detail he shared was that the producers were all involved, and he had many phone calls coming in when he experienced this. However, his partner and the other trainer, Jillian Michaels, the intense female coach, chose not to appear in the documentary, and she never reached out to Bob after his heart attack. The absence wasn't just noticeable, to be honest, it left you wondering, why not? Inserting this clip here because I'm in the middle of editing, and apparently Jillian Michaels may be taking legal action against Netflix because she says that she has proof, texts and email chains that things did not go down the way that they're stating it went down, that she never gave the people caffeine pills, that she wanted something with limited caffeine. But I do remember watching the episode where she got in trouble, and they even show it on the docuseries because she said that she did give caffeine pills. So I'm not sure where the disconnect is. But all to say is that apparently she has feelings. Why didn't she just go on the documentary? I don't know, but I think we're going to hear more. And then, of course, there were other hard truths. Contestants' metabolism slowed down so dramatically that many ended up heavier than before because of it. However, some said their metabolism was probably all messed up before the show had even started. But that was a big headline on the news a couple of years ago. And Ryan, the very, very first Biggest Loser winner, said that he even developed PTSD from watching himself on screen after regaining the weight. I can see how that can be so frustrating and difficult to watch. And then there was Suzanne, a former NYPD officer, who admitted that she didn't know who she was anymore after the show, not just in her weight, but financially, emotionally, mentally, or physically. She even avoided social situations because that's a kind of identity unraveling that happens when your entire sense of worth is tied to your body, and then when your body experiences a change. For me, the biggest takeaway in episode 3 was that sustainable change cannot come from extremes. It cannot come from public shaming, from crash dieting, or even from miracle medications alone. And it definitely cannot come from equating your worth again to your weight. That will only ever leave you chasing an ever moving target because our bodies change during our lifespan. They're supposed to. Real transformation has to be grounded in identity and healing and emotional support. It means finding out who you are beyond your body, beyond your talents, your values, your relationships, your character. Because at the end of the day, weight can fluctuate, metabolism can shift, but your worth doesn't. And the final scene in the documentary showed a stat that said when The Biggest Loser premiered in 2004, 32% of American adults were considered obese. By 2025, that number has climbed to 45%. So basically, for all of the spectacle, all of the extreme measures, the solution wasn't a solution at all. And here's where a psychological impact is just as important as a physical one, because gaining and losing weight isn't about our bodies, it's about our identity. When someone loses a significant amount of weight, especially this quickly, they're not just shedding pounds, they're also shedding a part of how they've seen themselves and how the world has seen them. And that can feel exciting, but it can also feel destabilizing. Some people describe, as I shared before, living with this fat girl or fat boy mindset long after the weight is gone, still feeling like the person who doesn't belong in certain rooms or like the person who takes up too much space or who has to apologize for their body. Even when the outside changes, the inside takes a long time to catch up if it ever does. So when the weight comes back, which even when using semaglutides, it does, often without sustainable support, the shame can feel crushing. It's not just disappointing seeing the body, it then also becomes the self-blame, that thought of, I failed and I'm back where I started and everyone can clearly see it. And again, this is why therapy is so critical in conversations about weight and health. But it's about self-image, resilience, identity, and worth. And without addressing those pieces, no physical transformation will ever feel complete. And as much as this is about the individual, this docuseries is also about us as a society. We need to do better in the way that we treat one another, the way we talk about weight, the way that we joke about it, the way that we judge. The comments don't just fade away. They truly stick to you and they shape the way children see themselves. And that pain carries deep into adulthood. And I'm sure by now you've heard the term white privilege, but the truth is that we carry all forms of privileges. Some of us move through the world with financial privilege, educational privilege, thin privilege, or other advantages that we don't always recognize. And living in a thin body is a privilege that you have come to have. And it's sometimes difficult to see how someone who doesn't have the same body, how they experience life. If you want to learn more about these different forms of privileges, I invite you to check out a podcast episode I recorded on the topic. And I think it's just as important to talk about this as it is to talk about race, class, gender, because body size in its own is a form of privilege and a form of disadvantage, whether we want to admit it or not. The way we treat people based on appearance is just another layer of privilege that doesn't get named enough. Because losing more weight on its own never solves the deeper issue. If you don't deal with the trauma, the shame, the relationships, the feeling of unworthiness, no number on the scale will ever feel enough. And that's why so many contestants ended up right back to where they started or worse, because weight loss without emotional support isn't a transformation, it's just really a Band-Aid. Something else that this documentary made me reflect on is the way that language shapes how we feel about our bodies. In English, the word fat is often loaded with shame and insult. If you use the word fat in a sentence and a child overhears, they can say, why are you saying a bad word? But the reality is that it's not a bad word. It's a descriptor. It's so interesting because in Spanish, the word gordo or gorda doesn't carry that same weight. And it's oftentimes used as a term of endearment. Calling a child or someone gordito or gordita is said out of love and not as a way to put somebody down. And I believe that this can be said for some Asian cultures as well. And in body positivity spaces, people are even reclaiming the word fat as neutral, as a simple descriptor rather than an insult. It shows just how much power we've given the word and how healing it can be to take that power back. And the contrast really highlights how culture impacts our relationships to our bodies as well. Because in some spaces, weight is neutral. And in others, I think especially in the American culture, it's like the ultimate judgment of your value. And for so many of us growing up in cultures where appearances are constantly commented on, whether in harsh ways or even in playful ways, it's no wonder that we then internalize those messages so deeply. If we take anything away from The Biggest Loser and this documentary, let it be this: shrinking yourself will never make you worthy. True transformation comes when we do the deeper work, healing from shame, building resilience, and embracing ourselves as enough. And of course, therapy is always an option. Working with a professional gives you the tools to not only understand what you're going through in the moment, but also to embrace change in a way that sticks. And if this conversation stirred something in you, I don't want to leave you without any next steps to take. I want to provide you with a few resources I recommend if you want to keep reflecting and healing. The first is my Free to Be Mindful podcast episode 144, titled Coping with Insecurities. I really dive into the roots of insecurity and share some tools to manage them in a healthier way. Also, episode 60, The Privilege and Language, and episode 183, Various Forms of Privilege, go into educating us on how privilege shapes the way that we view others and that we view our own lives. Then, episode 98, called Exploring Your Relationship with Your Food, is a guest interview with a nutritionist that provides valuable tools as well. And for those who are on semaglutides right now, I know that it's all the rage and becoming more and more accessible. And I just encourage you to be under doctor's orders and in a program that support all aspects of you, not just the numbers on a scale. And for this, I highly, highly recommend the program Metabolic, which is a program designed for sustainable health practices that focuses on long-term well-being rather than quick fixes. Full transparency here, as you'll see on the website, and you can probably just tell by our last names, the program is founded and ran by Dr. Sasha De Jesus, who happens to be a cousin of mine. More importantly, she's an obesity medical specialist and preventative cardiologist. I'm not just sharing this program with you because she's family, but because she's spectacular at what she does and can truly make a big change in the lives of the patients she works with. So if you'd like to learn more, you can tune into the podcast episode I had with her, episode 232, Managing Weight Mindfully with Dr. Sasha De Jesus, or you can visit her website, metabolichealth.com. So let's keep the conversation going. Did you watch The Biggest Loser back in the day? Did you watch this docuseries? And how did you see it now through perhaps a different lens? And if this resonated with you, please share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their worth is not the scale, because you never know who truly needs to hear this message today. Let's pour some tea into the comments and take away the reminder that in a world obsessed with appearances, you are already enough. And in a world where you can be anything, you are always free to be mindful. See you next time.